Rudy's past life was never something that I had really thought about. I had always kind of assumed he was just this antisocial outcast who unfortunately got bullied a lot. But after reading the details of the prologue, you'd be surprised to know that he was actually quite normal before. In fact, if not for one small decision during an early point in his life, Rudy could have become quite successful in just about anything. It was a core part of his past I'm surprised didn't make it into the anime. So, while I was going to do cut content starting from episode 1 onward, I actually found this backstory to be a bit more interesting. Which is why before we even get to episode 1, here's how Rudy's life was before reincarnation. A prologue to the return of my favorite cut content series. Before we kick this series off though, if you've ever wanted to read Mushoku Tensei yourself, then I highly recommend taking advantage of the pre-summer Isekai Odyssey sale my partners over at Bookwalker are having. With over 2,000 digital isekai now on sale, not only can you get up to 30% coin back when buying Mushoku Tensei, but you can also do the same for this season's Guilty Pleasure Cheat Skill, or the not so guilty pleasure smartphone isekai. Either way, both will give a special bookshelf bonus for the Bookwalker app, a small display to remind you that no matter how good or bad an isekai is, we'll always end up watching it because we just can't help ourselves. Then, with up to 50% off on audiobooks like Overlord, SAO, and Yojo Senki, you can get entire collections at a massive discount, making this an incredible sale you really don't want to miss out on. Plus, if it is your first time using Bookwalker to buy anything, then you can also use code AniNews to get $5 off your first ebook purchase. It's honestly a great way to support both the industry and my channel. So, if you want to delve deeper into isekai, then feel free to use the link in the description to check out the sale today. But now, let's talk about Mushoku Tensei. If you're wondering how Rudy ended up the way he did in his past life, you'd be surprised to know that it all stemmed from one basic decision. A simple whim to build himself a computer had changed this man's life from promising youth to hopeless adult. What I mean is that before this computer, he was actually quite normal. He was born into a well-off family, had 4 other siblings who likely cared for him, then in elementary school he was even praised as being smart for his age. That didn't necessarily mean he was academically gifted, but he was skilled at video games and even quite athletic. It was a time when he got along with everyone and everyone got along with him. But when his time at junior high had come around, his passion for computers was only intensified through his participation in the computer club. So much so that he would obsess over magazines and eventually save up enough to build his own. This may not have seemed like a problem at first, but with every waking moment now being spent on this computer, it was only natural for Rudy to begin to neglect his studies. He started to believe they weren't necessary in order to have a future. Now, you'd think his family would have stepped in to intervene, but they were completely ignorant as to what was happening. I mean, even Rudy himself didn't realize the harrowing path he was heading down. That being the case, when the time came to get admitted into high school, the only one his grades could get him into was the school widely considered to be the worst in the prefecture. It was the place in which all the delinquents were sent to. Of course, Rudy, having been praised for a majority of his life, truly believed he would breeze through this no problem. His inherent confidence not only made him feel like he could do anything, but it also made him feel like he was above the rest of the so-called idiots he went to school with. So, when an incident had led him to talk down on those he thought he was above, the delinquents he targeted were the worst of the worst. Not only were they his upperclassmen, but it just so happened one was actively trying to be the school's #1 menace. It was his first and last mistake, as this would be the reason he was bullied out of attending school anymore. So, just as we saw in the flashbacks, after beating him senseless and tying him naked to the gates, pictures would then circulate and plummet his social standing straight to the Shadow Realm. His family would attempt the occasional positive reinforcement, but trauma like that simply wasn't easy to recover from. No, it was far easier to just ignore everything and remain holed up instead. At least there he could kill time with his computer and the internet. Now, over time Rudy would take an interest in several hobbies, but none would ever last for longer than a year. Regardless of whether it was a blog, plastic models, or painting figurines, the moment he saw someone else could do it better, all motivation to continue doing it would just be lost. There was plenty of support and money given to help him find something that would break him out of his shell, but in reality they were all just a means to pass the time. They were all just hobbies intended to help him avoid facing the real problem. Looking back, the ideal scenario would have been to become a manga artist or light novel author, but those were the very people he would always make fun of. He would actively consume their creations all while relentlessly criticize them, judge their works without having put work into anything himself. So, when thinking back on what could have been, everything past grade school was just regret. Regret that he didn't have more time. Regret that he half-assed everything he'd ever attempted. If he could just go back and really apply himself like how he did when he was building his computer, then for sure he felt he could have become a pro at something. Maybe not the best in the world, but at the very least good enough to have accomplished literally anything. These were the thoughts Rudy was facing just hours after having been disowned and kicked out of the house. As a 34-year-old jobless man who just missed his parents' funeral, his brothers and sister had come to evict him. First by delivering their letter formally disowning him, then by smashing his computer which he valued more than himself. It was when he tried to fight back that his older brother, who was a black belt in karate, made sure to give him a full-on beating before finally removing him, leaving him on the streets to wonder what he even did wrong. Now, those few hours prior to the truck weren't just spent wallowing in self-regret, but were actually spent trying to come up with a plan for himself. If the ultimate goals were to get a job, find a place to live, and buy some food, then the first thing he needed to do was go to an employment agency. The only problem with that was that he didn't even know where any of them were. That and the fact that the agency only handled introductions. So, even if he was to get a job interview right now, not only did he not have a resume to show any experience, but he also didn't have the proper attire suitable for one. The impression he would make right now would just be miserable. Perhaps he could clean himself up with money from a loan company, but without a place to live, a resume wouldn't even be valid for him. So it was at this point that Rudy finally realized his life was ruined. He had wasted it all and accomplished nothing. Right as he had come to this realization though, a faint argument could be heard in the distance. It was the three high schoolers who were very clearly in the middle of a lover's quarrel. Something you'd be surprised to know is that this very sight brought back memories of situations very similar for him. Of course, memories not from middle school or high school, but instead junior high, which were when things were normal for him. It was a time in which Rudy did in fact have a chance with a girl. Since the two lived pretty close to each other, they were often in the same class and even walked home together. He didn't think that she had a crush on him, but if he studied hard and got into the same high school, then there was actually a good chance that the two of them could have ended up dating. In any case, the two would occasionally get into fights just like how the kids across the street from him were now. Or they would supposedly hook up if things went well. Either way, it was yet another reminder of what could have been had he not wasted his life away. Now, it was while these three students were arguing that Rudy would notice the truck barreling straight towards them. The pain in his ribs made it hard to yell, so the only other option was to run and help them. As much as he knew that helping was the right thing to do though, the main problem was not knowing how. Even so, what bothered him more was knowing that in 5 minutes he'd regret not doing anything again. So, rather than keep living the same way that he's always lived, Rudy decided that he would try to do something. Anything was better than constantly living in this state of regret. It would likely end up in him being dead, but if his last moments could be spent doing something, then that was a small piece of solace that he was willing to die with. So, as his broken ribs resisted his every action, Rudy would push through the pain and begin to run, actually managing to get there in time to save one of the guys. But right as he had pulled that person to safety, Rudy had come to realize that he couldn't stop. What initially started as a plan to simply pull this person back quickly changed into an exchange of placement when he found stopping his 100-kilogram body wasn't so easy anymore. So, despite actively avoiding the path of the truck, Rudy's forward momentum would still cause him to stumble into it. He did intend to save the other two students as well, but by the time he'd saved the first, the truck was already there and making contact with him. An interesting thing to note about the impact is that it wasn't the initial hit that had killed him. His excess fat had actually saved him from getting flattened. But after being bounced off the hood into a nearby wall, the truck would continue forward and pin him against the concrete, crushing his entire body and killing him on sight. So, unlike how they showed in episode 1, there was no scene on the operating table, just the accident then his new life. But yeah, that's pretty much Rudy's life as shown in the prologue. An interesting view that shows quite a bit of normalcy. It's not like he wanted to become this degenerate of a human being, but poor decisions and just plain bad luck had given him cards that he just couldn't play with. I don't know if that changes your perspective on him as a character, but all that is just a small portion of the true depth the novel goes into with events like this. So if you want to know more fascinating cut content like this, then be sure to subscribe because I'll be doing more for Season 1 and then Season 2 when it comes out. Now, before I go, I just want to shout out the Armory desk mat again. A high quality ultra-wide mousepad that takes inspiration from a lot of my favorite anime. It's honestly the best mousepad I've ever owned, and I've used quite a few of them. So if you want to get this desk mat, then you can actually get it for 25% off right now using the code below. Just click the link in the description or the pop-up beneath the video and enter the code at checkout. It's another massive way of supporting the channel. But anyway, as always, thank you so much for watching, and if you enjoyed this type of anime content, then you already know what to do. So, until next time, ciao!